finally got your first leadership gig, loving the new role, but feeling the pressure of your new responsibilities and all that expectation to perform? Well, don't worry, you're not alone. Crossing the chasm from a technical role to leadership, from doing stuff to managing and leading people, is the toughest challenge any leader must make. Welcome to the Human Edge Show, the podcast dedicated to help you do just that, successfully cross the doing to leading chasm. Campbell Such here, Chief Chasm Crossing Guide. I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to. I want to help you learn those lessons much more easily by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have already figured it out. You'll get great actionable tips, strategies, and techniques to make the transition so much easier and faster for you. Now let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of the Human Edge Show. It's great to have James Dickinson here. James, welcome. Fantastic to have you, mate.
Thank you. Stoked to be here.
I'm just going to go through and read out James's bio, so you've got a bit of a background, and then we'll kick off into the interview. So it's James Dickinson. James has been busy in his 20 years in tech, having operated on all sides of the tech divide. And I first met James back when I was on the user side, running IT for Bidfood, and James was with a vendor, and he pretty much rescued us with that vendor at the time. So we go back a bit, and there's some great credibility there and relationship with James. This has given him, as I would fully agree, a unique perspective on the industry, on industry leadership and how to run happy and effective teams. Starting off in tech sales, which is where I met James. James moved on to being a product owner for a large network and security portfolio, eventually returning to his happy place in a business and IT strategy specialist role for a large IT integrator. James finally took the plunge and moved out to fulfill several large CIO roles, and I know that was a big goal for James, which he knocked out of the park, before starting his current suite of IT firms, Unisphere, Cybertribe, Track, and MVP, and I'm sure we'll touch on those a bit later on, and there'll be some links to those in the show notes. So James, welcome. Just to kick things off, what's something that not many people would know about you?
There's a bit to choose from. I guess I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie and kind of always have been. I cycled mountain bike and road cycling competitively for about 25 years. I was also a competitive rock climber. And at one point, I kind of by accident did a 18-meter free solo climb. And free solo means no ropes, no protection, no nothing, just you and the rock. And I was actually out climbing with some friends, and I was trying to figure out the start of quite a tricky climb that I hadn't done before. And the crux, which is the hardest part of the climb, was at the beginning. And my two friends were climbing another route next to me. And so I was mucking around on the start of this climb. And after 3 or 4 goes, I kind of got it. And then I thought, I'll just go up another meter and do a couple more moves to sort of familiarize myself with the route. And then I thought, that's actually fairly easy. I'll do a couple more moves. And the next thing I knew, I was halfway up this thing. And I thought, I might as well keep going. And I didn't realize because I was so locked in, but my friends had seen what I was doing and freaked out. They peeled themselves off the climb and they ran round the back of the hill, tied off the ropes, and were ready to sort of throw the ropes down to me kind of thing if I got into trouble. But thankfully I didn't, and completed a very, very high solo climb. To put 18 meters in context, that's the equivalent of floor level on the 7th floor of an apartment building. So pretty high.
That's a long way up.
Really dumb. But that's what you do when you're 17, right? You do dumb shit.
Yeah. 17 and bulletproof, right?
Yeah,
and,
pretty much.
Yeah,
pretty much. So that's probably something that not many people know about me.
Well, I certainly didn't. I've heard a few of your tales of interest, intrigue, and mayhem, woe, and injury, but not that one. And thank goodness it worked out well for you, because I guess those are the things that it only takes one mistake, right? And things can go south pretty quick.
Yeah, you got no friends at 18 meters up.
One day I'll tell you the story of my son who got himself in a bit of a sticky position up on a hill too.
Okay.
So, James, just to sort of move into the leadership space, can you just cast your mind way back? Well, it's actually not that far back for you because you're such a youngster. To your early days and your early foray and steps into leadership, and what was that first opportunity and all those early opportunities, or if you can pick something out that's relevant and to this, and how did you feel, and what were some of the missteps you perhaps took, or some of the learnings that you took out of that might help a new leader to move more quickly, make a few less mistakes, and start heading up that leadership hill with a bit more comfort and confidence?
Absolutely. There's so much to kind of pick from in that time of personal growth and development to sort of reflect on, and I'm trying to think what the crunchiest lessons, I guess, were that I sort of carried through. I think probably, given my my passion for strategy, it was what I call the big and the small. And when you're a worker bee rather than the leader, you tend to be given quite sort of task or goal-orientated activities to complete, the small. And you are very much working from task to task or action item to action item. It's reasonably tactical, and that's okay, because that's your role. You're there to fulfill a deliverable or a capability, and that's cool. When you move up into leadership, that is a whole different paradigm. And all of a sudden, you need to understand and be able to articulate the big, the goal, the vision, the strategy, as well as the small, being the increments and the tactics required to deliver the big. And something that I found when I was sort of first thrown into that leadership paradigm, which happened by kind of by accident, to be honest. I was a product owner for a large IT integrator, so I had a portfolio of products that I was looking after, pretty large portfolio. It was about $90 million worth of revenue of all these network and security things, working in a team of 6 or 7, and my boss left. So they asked me to sort of step in for her to look after the team as sort of GM of this division. And then my next boss left, and I was asked to step up and look after the entire sort of area of the company. And by this stage, I was well over my head, quite admittedly. Of course, I took the role, and of course, I sort of took the opportunity and stepped into it. But there was a distinct point where I felt adrift, and it's because they weren't giving me the big so I could manage the small. They were still, I guess, my leaders were sort of treating me like a worker bee, given where I'd come from, and giving me very sort of task-orientated, tactical, outcome-driven things to do. They weren't giving me the broader understanding, the broader strategy, the goals, the visions, and trusting me to then message that to my people and help them self-determine success by developing the small, the goals and the tactics that got us through quarter on quarter, month on month, week on week, to deliver a successful outcome. And that really, I guess, gave me an insight very, very early on, kind of by accident, around an important point to leadership, and particularly leading leaders, of helping them to understand both sides of the coin, the goals and the direction and where we're going and why, and then helping them to craft, the how you get there, because those two have to marry up. Otherwise, you go nowhere.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. That's and so you come at that from sort of two. There's two takeouts there, isn't there? One is as the new leader put into a role, whether you're first into a leadership role or whether it's a next step on your leadership journey, is to make sure that as you take those steps up, that you understand you need the big and the small, and that for the people that are reporting to you, the small is fine, but it helps for them to understand some of the bigger pieces, because it helps put their stuff into perspective. But that when you go into that role, one of the key things that you need to be able to take out or get from your boss is the big, or enough of the big that's relevant to where you are, so that you can understand and put everything into context to work that through. And then on the other side of the coin, as the leader of leaders, as you so eloquently put, a key message for anyone that's a leader of leaders, and especially someone that's put someone into a new role, and particularly a new leader, someone that's come from doing stuff to managing and leading people, to help them see that there is a difference and that they understand enough of around that the strategy, the bigger picture stuff for them in that role. Does that pretty much cover where you're going with that? Yeah. So that
sums it up.
Yeah, very, very insightful. So that would be one of the key messages that you took, James. Any sort of any missteps that you can remember that might help someone in a new leadership role go, well, I won't do that because James said it didn't really help him, or it didn't really work out. But actually, it's amazing how much you learn from the missteps, right?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to admit to anything either, by the way.
You know me. There were many, and enough that we could probably fill a whole other podcast. One of the, I guess, biggest missteps that I certainly faced was coming from being a relative specialist in an area to then managing those specialists. I was, I guess, not expressing a heck of a lot of humility, and given that I was the one that was promoted, I was sort of showing/telling them what to do without trusting them that they were absolutely good and competent and needed direction from me, not being shown exactly what to do. So rather than going, I'm a leader now, that's a different thing. I can trust you to do what you know how to do, and I just need to take a step back and trust that you'll get it done. I was diving back into what was ostensibly my old role and trying to be far too tactical and trying to be too hands-on and trying to do the work rather than trusting my team to do the work. And that caused frustration, that caused animosity and friction, and none of that's good, particularly when you're a new leader, because then you have to figure out, and amongst your new leadership duties, how to deal with conflict, which is hard at the best of times. So a learning that I took from that was you have to be prepared when you step into a leadership role to let go of a lot of what you used to do, because you have different expectations. There are different expectations of you now, and you need to figure out some tools on how to deal with that. And that's something that I certainly got wrong.
Yep. And do you think, how much of a place do you think in there is for a leader of leaders to help that new leader see that? And have you had some really good experiences with leaders that have done that? That might help those leaders of leaders better understand how they could do that in a way that's effective?
Yeah, I've had a pretty mixed bag there. I've had some incredible people leaders that I've really looked up to and been really lucky to have worked for over the years. For that particular issue or instance, I think they were perhaps a little too distanced and a little too tied up with other priorities, and they probably missed that I was struggling with that with my particular incident. But if I were to promote someone into a leadership role now, I would probably coach them along those lines and explain, how you need to create separation when you step into a new role, and not do it in such a way that you let people fail or you leave people unsupported, but just to create a clear delineation of, this is your job and that's what I expect of you, and this is how I will support you in the achievement of that. And if you ever have questions or need help, let me know, because I've done it and I can help, but I'm not going to impose myself on you until you ask.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's the difference between the what and the how, right? So, and maybe the why. So the why is the reasons, but the what is, this is what we need to get done. Off you go and do it. And I'm not going to tell you specifically how to do it. That's up to you, because I may have a really good way of doing it, but guess what? You may have another way that's either just as good, might even be better, and I might learn something from it. And that's really hard, right? And especially when you step into a leadership role where you feel like in the past, all of your, it's probably the wrong words, but status and kudos and sense of accomplishments come from achieving things directly rather than achieving things through other people. And when you've had that toy or that, that taken away from you by virtue of being in that leadership role, it's very difficult to let go of that. And there was one of the people I interviewed earlier said that one of the biggest challenges was to hand off a task and then not to take it back.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to do, right? And so do you have some tactics or strategies for how you handle that, and how someone else might better do it?
I guess I've worked a lot, obviously, in technology, in and around various elements of technology. So I tend to sort of refer back to architectural principles and enterprise architecture as a framework for dealing with that. And if you used to work at the technology layer, for example, or used to work at the data layer because that was your role and you were reasonably, boxed or specialist in that, you're now actually, as a leader, more working at the business layer. So you're now more working at a business domain layer, articulating what it is that we need to achieve, and not diving down into the details of, the process layer, the data layer, the application layer, the technology layer. So you need to allow yourself to lift higher up the model and think and act more broadly, and trust that your team have got their areas of specialization.
Yeah. So a really nice analogy or a metaphor for how you can explain it to someone in a way that might really just so they get it. James, just before you talked about conflict and ending up, because of the way that you approached one of your early step forays into leadership, creating through your style conflict. What have you learnt in terms of how to deal with conflict? Because a lot of people tend to shun it or avoid it or run away from it or go, it'll get better. My experience is if you don't deal with it, it's like a stone in your shoe. It just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah. What have you found works really well with I guess, identifying, accepting there is conflict, and then approaching it in a way that leads to positive and constructive outcomes?
Definitely. I'll answer the question a little bit differently. What I've found through working in a bunch of different organizations and a bunch of different teams, and then running organizations and running teams myself, is, and this is my experience, and it may not be everyone's, but I feel that conflict is a byproduct of the culture. And when there isn't a strong, collaborative, trusting culture, you tend to have more conflict. And that's not to say that if you get the culture right, you won't have conflict. You still will, because we're humans and we don't always see eye to eye. But if you've got a strong culture that is purposeful and appropriate to what it is you're trying to achieve, dealing with conflict within that context is much, much easier. So if you are in a call center environment, or in a retail environment, or in a corporate business-to-business sales environment, or in an IT support environment, they will each have their own sort of unique requirements and expectations from a cultural perspective. And if you get that right, it is much, much easier to deal with conflict. As you say, the stone in the shoe analogy is a perfect one. There is no better way to deal with conflict than straight away, really, really quickly, with absolute transparency and humility. The amount of times that I've gone into a conflict resolution situation with what I thought was, the answer, only to, hear both sides of the stories and have to flip my mental model 180 degrees because I had it completely wrong. I mean, I've lost count how many times that's occurred. So get the culture right, make sure that it's appropriate to what it is that you're trying to drive towards as an outcome, make sure that you deal with things quickly, and make sure that you go into those situations with an open mind and let people be heard. There's nothing more important than whether someone's right or wrong. Let them speak their piece. And often I've had people actually kind of realize how wrong they are whilst they're explaining the situation. And you can see that look in their eye where they go, shit, I'm on the wrong side of this. And they actually start to correct the behavior themselves, and you don't even have to do anything. So yeah, let people talk, give people the time and the space. Don't talk over them. Don't, shout and belittle and all the rest of it. Just let them say their piece, and then take it from there in a respectful, collaborative way. And most of the time, unless you have a very, very particular personality, you'll find that will help to resolve the situation.
Yeah, well, that's awesome advice. Yeah, it certainly mirrors mine as well. If you and especially the piece about being heard, I believe one of the fundamental human needs is to be heard, and when we're not listened to sort of fully get our message and emotions and get it all out, it's so easy to feel not heard, and then that tends to take things the other way, right? Perhaps one of the other pieces for me with conflict too is it's not necessarily as easy to delineate as there's two types, but to me, conflict can have both a positive and a negative thing. If it's an aggressive conflict that's a result of personalities clashing, or personalities are being brought into it, that's one thing. But the other piece is, in any organization, you don't want everyone to be saying and agreeing to the same thing. So to be able to support and have healthy, let's call it conflict, but certainly to feel that if you disagree with something, if we know that here's the goal and here's the why and here's where we want to go, and your idea of how to get there is this and my idea is this, then we need to be able to debate that, heatedly if necessary, but we need to be able to debate it and then whoever and however we get to a point where we decide this is the way we're going to go, but need to feel comfortable to be able to do that. And I to one of your earlier points around letting your reports know that you're available to whenever they need to talk. So that's one of the things that I struggle with in my early career, was that I often felt that I couldn't say to my boss, explain to my boss how I was feeling, and I felt like I needed it. And whether it was true or not, that was how I felt, that I couldn't explain it to them, or I couldn't tell them about it. Have you been in that position, and and what did you do? And then on the other side, what do you do to help make the environment more open to people being able to come to you and have those difficult conversations where they may be saying, hey, I need some help, but they feel really uncomfortable to do so?
Yeah, definitely. I'll take the first one first. So, managing up, if you like, and having that difficult conversation north, if you will. I've had what I think, and I've sort of found as a reasonably unusual approach to dealing with management and superiors and so forth over my career. And what I mean by that is I've kind of, all my life, I've sort of had this personal mantra, and it's helped with managing up. And that mantra has been, I'll always be okay. And what that means to me is, I'll always be okay because it's up to me. It's not up to anyone else. And I back myself. So that personal mantra has allowed me to have conversations with perhaps a little more courage than I otherwise would have. So if I felt that I'm right, or if I felt particularly strongly about something, I've sort of leaned on that mantra to give myself the courage to have that difficult conversation, knowing that no matter what happens as a result of it, I've said what I truly believe to be true and correct. And if that's not taken the right way, and if that's misconstrued, and if that goes south, well then, to be honest, I probably don't want to be there anyway, because that's not the organization for me, or that's not the kind of leader that I want to work with, or whatever. And I know it sort of seems a little bit arrogant to say that, but I wasn't always coming from a position of being the boss and being the whatever. I took this position really, really early in my career, and had conversations with people far more senior than I. But that was just a core part of my values, and I felt that it was important to speak the truth, say what needed to be said, often say what others wouldn't or didn't feel like they could. But again, leaning back on that personal mantra that I'll always be okay because it's always up to me. And if I got fired, well, I wasn't meant to be there anyway because I couldn't speak my truth, and that's not the environment that I want to work in. Yeah. So that's sort of the way I managed up.
Yeah. And just to round out the bit about managing up, so your intent was always constructive and with a view to the organisation and your team's goals and all of that stuff. So it was good intent. So if it went south, well then if you didn't say it, it felt bad, and if you did say it and it went south, well then, as you say, maybe it's not the right place to be, or maybe it's not the right person to be reporting to. So
absolutely. And an example is I was working for a large organisation. They were going through a restructure. The proposed restructure was put forward, and I went to my I guess it would have been my manager's manager, so about 3 levels up, And I booked some time and I said, I want to discuss the restructure, not my place in it. This isn't coming from a place of self-interest. I think you've got it wrong. And I want to explain why. And it wasn't done in a public forum where someone might felt backed against the wall or someone's being subservient. It was done in an appropriate way, which was one-on-one in a closed room. And I laid it out, jumped on the whiteboard, and I said, I think you've got it wrong. Here's why. And here's what I think we should do. And here's why. And as it turned out, it was the appropriate way to deal with it. They agreed with me. They changed the approach to the restructure, and we got a better outcome as a result of it. So there's a way to deal with it. It's not always about creating conflict or feeling like you can, speak out for the sake of speaking out. There's still an appropriate way to do it, but it's to have the courage and courage of conviction to have those conversations.
Yeah, nice.
And any good leader will respect that of you.
Yeah.
And if they don't, well, to be honest, you probably don't want to be there anyway.
Yeah. If it's done with the right intent, for the right reasons, right, which you obviously did, that's awesome. What an awesome example. That's brilliant, James. Good on you.
And I didn't always get it right. I've got a litany of examples where I've done that and they've said, no, you're wrong and here's why. And I've been schooled and I've said, yep, no, I get it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I've walked away with a different perspective, knowing that, I did get it wrong, but at least I had that conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's two things there. One is you had the conversation, so you had the courage of your convictions. And I'd encourage anyone that's listening to this and watching that I'll always be okay. What a brilliant mantra, James. That's very cool. But also that person 2 or 3 levels up in the hierarchy may have access to information that you don't have. And so you're seeing it from your perspective and laying it out. And if they go, wow, we hadn't considered that, that's a really good idea. That's awesome for them. And if they can then do the same to you and lay it out in a non-confrontational way, but a nice, here's how it is, then you get the chance to learn something too and see how they operate, which is good all the way around, right?
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. There's that's awesome. I think we had 2 questions there, but I can't remember what the other one was.
I was trying to remember what the second part was as well.
So one was managing up and the other one was what would you do to make it easier for your direct report or maybe 2 or 3 levels down to be able to air their thoughts and views or to ask for help in a way that they might not otherwise feel comfortable to do because they're really feeling out of their depth or in some other way lacking in confidence to reach out because of their lack of experience.
Yeah, definitely. So a tactic that I've used and still use quite heavily is to express probably more, overemphasize the humility element. And what I mean by that is being really clear with your team that you don't know everything. You're not the expert on all things. There is more that you don't know than you do, which is very easy for me because I don't know all things and there's a hell of a lot more that I don't know. But to emphasize that point, almost overemphasize that point and encourage your team to bring forward ideas, thoughts, opinions, alternative options, strategies in a way that they're comfortable with. Some feel emboldened by a group conversation and feel that there's safety in numbers and bringing things up. Some want to have a one-on-one with you. Some would be terrified to talk to you about it, but they're okay to send you an email. So encouraging however they feel most comfortable to communicate that stuff to you, to do that, safe in the knowledge that it's not going to be looked upon negatively. And so, I do that quite often, and I sort of really emphasize to those that I lead to say, look, this is what I reckon, this is where I think we should go or what we should do, and here's my rationale and here's why. But if I'm missing something, let me know, and give them the space to do that rather than things be a decree.
Yeah, that's nice, and yeah, that's really cool. And then the other little piece too, that's sort of maybe an add-on to that is when someone comes to you with a message or even some criticism, and perhaps especially some criticism, they're testing you. So as their leader, to see what your reaction is going to be, and if your reaction is negative or you're justifying why you're doing it rather than, as you mentioned before, hearing them out. Giving them a chance to speak, it's kind of like the first time they do it, it's like putting their toe in the door of your office, and the second, if you've got an office, of course, and then the second, and if they get a good reaction, then the second time maybe the whole foot comes in, then it's the leg, and so each time you providing the environment and painting the picture that then encourages them to carry on. So a lot of it's around how they see the response as well, and also not necessarily that you're going to take it on, but that you've seriously considered it, and sometimes you will take it on, right? So yeah.
And if you do, and you're a leader, please give credit. You don't need the credit because you're the leader. If someone comes to you with a better idea, credit them.
Yeah, nice.
That is so important, and that was something that early on in my career I didn't see, and man, that festered like a wound more than pretty much anything else. Where you come up with a great idea and they pick it up and run with it, but at no stage did they say, "Oh, and by the way, this was James's idea." I mean, it's such a little thing, but it's so important.
Yeah,
it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Just to change tack slightly, James, if you look at the stats around who's more likely to succeed in leadership and who's better in a technical role, the stats don't really support the bulk of people moving into leadership. In fact, the stats look like maybe 1 in 10 make good natural leaders, and a 2 in 10 with a couple of with some good coaching and mentoring and training and support and help can be really good leaders. But the other 7 out of 10 may or will struggle. So the challenge is, as a technical person or a leader looking to find a new leader, what do you look for? So a technical person trying to decide whether they should go into leadership, or a leader looking into a technical team going, well, who's the next leader, or who are the next leaders in this team? What do you look for, and how do you identify the ones that have the potential to do that? And I'd just like to preface this by saying, I don't believe that either path is a good or a bad path. The best thing to do for anyone is to find the right path. And if you're if the technical path is a place you should go, the worst thing you should do is into leadership. The challenge we have is all of so much kudos and status and financial reward is based around leadership, but it can also lead to massive heartache, burnout, and terrible stress.
Definitely. Two parts to the answer. The first part kind of goes back to that enterprise architecture model example again, where if you are trying to solve a problem with your team, and you hand them the whiteboard marker and they go to the board, if they are going straight to one of the layers and they're really comfortable and speak with absolute authority on one of those layers, then they're probably more aligned to being a specialist, to being a, to potentially not being a leader per se. If they lift the conversation up and start talking more at that business domain level about the cause and effect, then they're probably, and they may not even know it, but they're probably more attuned to a more leadership-based approach, because they're thinking about all the layers and the effect of top-level decision-making on how that's going to play out through the rest of the domain or the organization. So, handing someone the whiteboard marker, posing a problem to them just in a normal business context can give you a good insight as to how their brain works and whether they're perhaps more attuned to leadership or not. So that leads on to my second point, what I call thinking in 3D. So good leaders, I've found, almost build a mental model like a neural network when they're trying to solve a problem. They think about the immediate dependencies and the further dependencies, upstream, downstream, all the causative actions that could be taken and how that could be positive or negative. And it's sort of like taking, it's like one of those 3D models that, explodes out and becomes this 3D thing so that you can move it and look at it. I've found that good leaders naturally think in 3D, and that's just how their brain works. So you give them the problem of A, they don't give you the solution of B. They give you the exploded view of the whole alphabet and how each of those elements creates tension against each other. And it's difficult to tease out whether someone can think in 3D or not. And it's something that you have to work on as a leader to figure out how you identify that in people. But if someone has that ability, then that will probably mean that they'll make a good leader, because when faced with a human problem, they will think about the causative elements to why that's become a human problem. or when they're talking about a technical problem, they'll pull it apart and think of all of the different elements that could contribute to why that's a technical problem. I hope that sort of makes sense, but that's sort of what I look for.
Yeah. So that gives you a good way to zero in on the people that are more likely. And where does the people part of that fit in around identifying leaders? Because some people are far more comfortable with things, and other people are more comfortable with relationships and people, and some people obviously fit across the whole lot. Is there anything you do in that space to kind of, because if someone struggles to deal with people, and that's going to be much harder for them to be a successful leader, right? Even if they are a 3D thinker, they're more likely to be a strategist, but may not be a leader, possibly.
I guess probably the element that I layer on top of that next is empathy, and whether you are a naturally, outgoing person, or you're an introspective person, or whatever kind of personality type you are, if you demonstrate empathy, and that is a natural response for you, you'll probably make a good leader. That's not deterministic, and that's not always the case, but I certainly look for empathy in future leaders. I generally find that they are more quickly more successful because of who they are and just expressing their natural way, than someone trying to turn themselves into a leader that don't potentially have quite as much empathy ready to hand for a given situation.
Yeah. Empathy to me is one of the key human skills that's kind of the fundamental ones that underpin so many other things around relationships. And
Definitely.
If you struggle with empathy, it's really going to make it difficult to be a really strong and successful leader that people follow.
Definitely.
James, just before we wrap up, is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have?
I don't know. I don't think there's nothing sort of jumps out at me as a question that, has been left unsaid, if you like.
Okay.
No, I think you've given good coverage.
I do have one question, which is a bit out of left field. So if it's not appropriate, let me know. You've always spoken really highly of your father, and is there what's one thing that you've learned from your father or your parents, if that's more appropriate, that you think would be useful and applicable to new leaders and their bosses?
Definitely. I'm really proud of what my dad accomplished in life and in business, and I've learned a lot from him. And I think a lot of the way I am is from having observed from a young age, my father in business and leadership. I remember distinctly when I was really young, and I'd say that I was like 6 or 7 or something, like I was really young. And I remember, seeing Dad as the CEO and the boss and all the rest of it. And it's a difficult concept when you're young. And I remember asking Dad, does that mean that you're the smartest in the whole company? Because as a kid, I was trying to get my head around what is the CEO thing? What does this leadership thing mean? And he laughed and he said, no, far from it. And I was confused. And I'm like, well, how do you be the boss if you're not the smartest? And he said, well, being the boss isn't about being the smartest. It's about identifying what you're really good at and then surrounding yourself with people that fill in the gaps of the things that you're not good at. And I mean, it's logical, right? It's just common sense. But I see a lot of leaders, bad leaders, don't do that. Either they don't do it intentionally, and they surround themselves with people that aren't really up to the job because they want to feel superior, or they surround themselves with people that are just like them because that's their happy place and that's where they feel comfortable. So I guess something that I learned really, really early on, much earlier than I arguably should have, because it didn't really make sense at the time. I think it permeated, and something that I've always sought to do in my career is figure out what am I really good at and be okay with that. And what am I not good at? And there's plenty that I'm not. And rather than feel threatened by those that are good at things that I'm not, embrace that, bring them in the tent, lean on each other, share your skills and experience and attributes, and likewise lean on theirs, and build a team around you that's really highly performing, based on the differing skill sets. And that to me has always been a key part of leadership and building teams that are greater than the sum of their parts. And I, learned that lesson sort of by proxy really early on. And as it turns out, it was a really valuable lesson.
Yeah, it's a complete gem. If you're watching this, park that in the back of your brain and think about the teams that you're building and the people that you have around you, and look for where your strengths are and look for where your weaknesses are. And don't try and fix your weaknesses. Find someone else who it's a strength and bring them into the team, and don't feel threatened by them. That's awesome. James, this has been absolutely outstanding. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll have a chance to do phase 2 at some point in the future. I'll get you back on the show.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate. See you. Take care. Thanks for listening. If you have a friend or a colleague who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. If you have a friend or a colleague who would not benefit, but you haven't been in touch with them for a while, give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and to help me create the show that's most useful for you. And if you're frustrated or having challenges or would like some help, guidance, assistance with your first leadership role, then check out integrationcatalyst.com in the link in the podcast notes below. Or pass this on to your boss to nudge them to get you the help you really need to cross the doing to managing chasm and get you powered up on your leadership and management journey. Oh, and if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, hit subscribe. Until next time.